open discussion the other day, so I copied that in as part of it. But yeah, but otherwise, this is sort of the core things I thought.
Okay, stream's up.
Cool. Just loading it up now.
Password has methods, and then those
Okay, yeah.
methods accomplish something.
Okay, so I wasn't sure about this, and I didn't want to like do too much. Like go and read the Fallible Ideas article on it and stuff. The reason I said this was, so I was sort of surprised by some of the stuff in the last tutorial. I guess particularly as well, like a lot of the stuff that I thought was a method based on, or like a path forward method, we covered a bit in the yes/no stuff. And so, I mean, it makes sense that they're similar, or that they're like overlapping rather.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, Zoom, I forgot about that. Probably need to do that. Yeah. So that's why I sort of said that, because I guess the other reason as well was that what I thought the main problem was this idea of like if you're wrong, how do you know? I thought that might have more solutions as well, and so I didn't want to try and be like overly exclusive about how you would do this stuff. Like discussion is important, but then like particular methods you might use in that discussion can be different.
Yeah, there's definitely more than one method. One of the things I sometimes ask people is, will you either use my proposed methods or propose alternative methods to solve the same problems? And I think if they'll do neither of those, that shows something is going wrong. Because a lot of people say, why should I have to use your methods? And then they don't have any of their own.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. So I thought I had uh, like I thought I had like read in the Paths Forward article before about various methods. That's why I thought they overlapped with the yes/no stuff. So I probably need to just
Yeah, there are various concrete suggestions. We just don't focus on them.
yep. Um,
Well, we brought up
so
some
I'm
of them, like having proxies who can, or like representatives who you monitor. That's a
not,
concrete method for people with a lot of resources who have too many fans to deal with by themselves, even if the methods of dealing with people are very fast and efficient. If you're famous enough, that still doesn't work, and you need other people to do some stuff. You have to find ways to delegate.
yep. That makes sense. Um, so yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, here. That's like a technique, roughly method. Um, yep. So yeah, so I definitely don't have all of these. I'm not sure we really covered all of these, but I feel like some of them are they're sort of auxiliary as such. I'm not sure if I'm judging that correctly, but
Yeah, we definitely didn't cover everything. Um, but I think we got most of the main concepts. But did you go through any of the links? There's a bunch of like other articles at the bottom.
no, I didn't. So I avoided reading this. I guess I should have, like, if I allocated more time, I would have like done a review of like comparison. Um, so I probably should do that. Um, this, by the way, does this roughly line up with like your debate policy, or is this broader?
This is more generic. I told people to only use it if there was a problem with the debate policy as a backup.
Yeah, okay. So this is like, yeah, this is more general, but presumably higher burden type thing. Um, less optimized. And yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, so the using intellectual processes to combat bias article has some other stuff on the more concrete side. It has ideas like allocating a certain amount of time if you have too many inquiries, and then randomly selecting inquiries so that your biased opinion of which ones are any good cannot control things, right? You can't just like avoid certain things while thinking that you're avoiding dumb things and you know that there's no problem there. Randomization helps deal with that. There are other proposed things like you can, and you don't have to randomize all of them. Like you can pick some yourself and then do some random. You can also like let other people pick. Like you can have your audience upvote things and answer the most upvoted stuff, which also has its own biases. Like it's not a replacement for having some randomization. And you can also let opponents pick. You have to have some way of picking opponents, but you can do that by various ways. Anyways, if you find like, you know, high status people who disagree with you, or you pick some random people who disagree with you, or whatever, then you let them pick some of the questions you answer. Then that, again, is a way to not let yourself be biased. It makes it harder for you to do the wrong thing, which I think is really important. People are way too willing to sort of trust themselves and bet their lives on their own integrity. And I think in science, people know that that is a bad approach. In science, you know, we stick to the scientific method and we use double blind and controls and stuff, rather than just trusting ourselves and saying, well, I'm a really rational scientist, so I'll just do a good job and understand the scientific method and it should be fine. We say, you know, that's not good enough. Don't trust yourself. Make it as hard as possible to fool yourself. And if you do that and you have integrity, it might work. You need both. Like, you need to make it as easy as possible on your integrity and also strive to have integrity. If you only have methods but like no integrity, they're never gonna work. Like you'll find some way to cheat. But the methods lower the burden on your integrity, which you should lower as much as possible. It's just unreasonable not to. I mean,
Okay, so when we say,
as
oh, yep,
much as you can find good methods for, like as much as possible sounds like spend 1,000 hours to lower it a tiny bit, so you can run into efficiency problems. But you know, in general, if you can find methods that'll lower it, you should.
yep. When you say like the burden on your integrity, is that like the number of times that your integrity needs to like do work to like prevent something sort of thing, like it's being stressed? Is that what you mean?
That's a decent model. There, you could also model the severity of the times.
Yeah, okay, yeah. As in, yeah, just having
And
a
it can be hard
once
to
a year, but
organize. It can be hard to organize them into discrete times. Like you can have something that's an ongoing issue. So yeah, but sort of the total amount of work your integrity has to do is a decent approximation.
yep. 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 Yeah, that makes sense. So I sort of get the feeling then that there are two sort of broad parts of like paths forward. Um, there's a core element, and that is like that this is a problem. Like if you're wrong, how do you find out why why are you generally able to find out, and how are you confident that like this is going to work for everything? Um, and we can answer that with like some really broad general ideas. And then there's like and those that sort of starts to overlap with the second part. And the second part is like how you actually implement your own paths forward. Um, so there's like paths forward as an objective idea, and then there's like Elliot's methods for doing paths forward. Well,
Yeah.
that's sort of the yep, yep. And that makes sense. I think that's
Yeah.
sort of the error that I've made here, is that, yeah, right now, like in terms of the article on FI, they're like together, which I think is fair as well in that, like, it's in large part an original idea of yours, so it sort of makes sense. And I can't really think of, like, this is, it's pretty generic stuff. It's not like your debate policy is like particular for you, right? Um,
Well,
and that's different.
it's fairly generic, and other people could use a very similar one.
Yeah. I noticed like there are some things that like I couldn't apply though. Like you've got different limits for chains of impasses from each side, and that would be like unsafe for me to do, for example. Um,
Oh,
but
yeah.
but besides that, yeah, no, I do think it's like it's broadly generic. It makes sense. And I couldn't have this, for example.
Right. Yeah, you'd have to
Um,
change the number.
do you know if anyone, no one else in FI has like published a debate article, a debate policy, right?
Um, Alyssa has some sort of paths forward policy document, and I think Rami might have something. And I think Gavin put up a paths forward policy.
Yeah, okay. Um, there was, so
Yeah, that on.
I mean, I don't know if this like goes anywhere, like whether Alyssa's got like, yeah, whether this is like a website or anything. The only thing I've found is like, yeah, this Git thing. Um,
Yeah,
but
well,
yeah.
Mercurial. But yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, if you go to Alyssa's thread on Curie.us, you can find links to this stuff occasionally. I think he might have more than one page of stuff.
Oh, there we go.
You just go to the end and then skim for a link. Yeah, like the end said learning plan.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, cool. Oh, yeah, yeah, there we go, revision history. So this is, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Alyssa links to this
Yeah.
site as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's a policy thing there.
Yep. That's not the right one. I think I need to, I'm just gonna, one thing that's, I don't know if, actually this is just a general sort of question. I know you use a different monitor for streaming, like I do, well, sometimes depending on what I'm streaming, but uh, I find like that I'm like twisted slightly in terms of the way the desk is set up and the monitor on the other side. Do you have an issue with that, or?
Do you mean to your primary monitor or secondary or what?
I don't know, like primary monitor's here, and then left or right hand monitor and left hand monitor. But I just end up like twisting quite a bit. So the keyboard is like parallel to the primary monitor, as opposed to like this. But I
Okay,
can't sort of,
yeah.
yeah.
I use my primary monitor like most of the time.
Okay.
Like I'm streaming from my primary monitor, I swap everything onto it.
Okay. Yep. One thing just thinking about Mac, that is sort of nice, is like you can change the like primary monitor in macOS, quite easily, so that like
Yeah, this
notifications won't
arrangement
come up.
thing.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Whereas I'm not sure if I can do that on Windows as easily. Should probably figure that out. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that I use like this monitor instead of my main monitor. Actually, let me see if I can fix that now because it would be more convenient. I noticed just thinking about the typing stuff that has been talked about in Discord and recently, sort of thinking more about it, and there's like there's environmental things that I can change, which I should probably like change first and get solid, because otherwise they're just going to be continuous or issues over and over. Yeah, okay. So probably
Yeah, so if I'm typing in a window or using it a lot, I usually put it on my main screen, and I don't use the other ones as a main screen like on a consistent basis. Like I get breaks from it a lot, it's just for smaller things. Unless it's like a video, but I'll just if I'm just watching a video, I can turn my chair rather than turn my neck.
Yep. Yeah, I can do. Yeah, that's much like with something like that. I don't have too much of a problem because like not typing sort of thing makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay, so about the trust stuff, another way to look at it is think about what it would take for someone else to trust you, or like trust your objectivity or whatever. If you do whatever it would take for a reasonable other person to accept what you're saying, that's a good bar for accepting it yourself. That's a good standard. If you're holding yourself to a lower standard than what an external observer would be convinced by, you're giving a lot of room for bias, and you're lacking transparency. Like you're relying on non-public, non-communicated information. Otherwise, if you're judging by the same information as the external observer, then the standards should be the same.
Yep.
And then
Oh, yeah.
the reverse way to look at that is if you don't trust yourself, then it's easier for other people to trust you because you're not just saying, well, I trust me, you should trust me too. Like you have actual reasons. So whatever reasons you use for convincing yourself could convince other people as well.
Yep. So this relates to something that I started to write because I was thinking about it. It's not something that I've thought as much recently, but it was something that I definitely thought like some years ago. Which was roughly like if people say I'm smart but then I say that something is good or they should do something or whatever else, and then they don't do it, like it felt like there was a conflict or it was frustrating or things like that there. Um, uh, anyway, yeah, and I started to sort of think about this stuff like what does it mean about like how I treat like other people's opinions relative to myself and stuff. Um, anyway, yeah, I feel like that is sort of the core of it. Um, in that one of the explanations for why people wouldn't listen to someone that they would, otherwise call smart is how do they trust them? Because, I didn't have any external reasons for why people should trust me. I didn't write anything down. There wasn't like, an objective thing. Doesn't mean that people
Yeah.
necessarily would just by doing it, but there's at least like a major problem there. But yeah.
Yeah, so another way to look at this in the big picture is it's an alternative to the social status hierarchy. How can you show that you're good or that your ideas deserve attention or what their place in the world should be? All that kind of stuff.
That's like
And
passport in general.
yeah, and how can you allocate attention to stuff? Because the standard way of allocating attention is mostly social status. Look at stuff that has gone through gatekeepers, which is a proxy for social status or popularity or whatever.
Yeah.
Or just talk to other people with social status greater than or equal to yours is a common strategy, and just ignore the riffraff, as they're called. So those kinds of attitudes are quite different than paths forward, which is more let's ignore the source of an idea and figure out how to evaluate the content. And instead of saying there are too many ideas, we can't evaluate all of them rationally, let's figure out how to actually tackle that problem and organize things so that it works instead of just giving up and filtering on social status. And stuff like having an archive of things you've written and objective reasons that you think you're right instead of just I used my best judgment and I seemed right. You can do better than that. It's a way for you to gain intellectual status with people who care about such things. It's a way to objectively get status as a real intellectual instead of a social climber type intellectual.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Sorry, let me just fix these windows. So, I mean, putting the word real there, but it's just a shortcut. But yeah.
Of course, the reception's been somewhat poor because trying to replace the social status game is threatening to all the high status people who have played the game and invested in it. So more or less everyone fancy hates the idea of changing the rules to reward things they didn't optimize for, like truth seeking.
Yeah, so it's sort of, yeah, I don't know, it's interesting.
I've gotten like fairly explicit direct reactions from people saying more or less, you're trying to get people's attention, just earn it the regular way by social climbing. I mean, they don't say the social climbing part, but they're just like, you want people to reallocate more attention to you, you're just competing in the regular game, and just impress people and then they'll listen to you and forget about all this stuff where you're trying to like call them irrational if they won't pay attention to you. That's how people take it. They find rationality stuff like pressuring because it is, but they blame me for the pressure. They blame me for the pressure instead of seeing it as like I'm the messenger of rationality. They're just like, you're making up this system of rationality by your choice in order to pressure people, which is not reasonable.
Yeah, no. There's an element of, so in terms of, like, if anyone was to claim that this is just like you're playing the same game still, just in like a different thing or whatever else, I sort of feel like that's, I don't know if that's holds up in the sense that people usually, like, if someone's just bad at playing a social game, usually they just get ignored. They don't, like, there's no particularly like negative reactions to that. I think, like, it's only when you go outside of that, when you try and play by different rules, and there's a huge sort of variety of different things there, like whether that's uh, you know, things that are counted as mental illness and just socially unacceptable, or stuff like this that's not, like, it's based entirely in like rationality, but there's still a negative reaction. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, like I wrote an open letter to some AGI people saying, why are you betting your career on Popper being wrong? Do you have any literature that answers Popper? They ignored me, and people on Less Wrong were like, how dare you demand that they pay attention to you, and that no one has to answer you or your arguments. Which, first of all, I thought that they should answer Popper, who has actually high social status and like well known, like, even if you make the excuse that you can't answer all the riffraff, you could certainly answer all the famous philosophers who have given arguments about why you're wasting your career. There aren't too many of them. You could start there.
Well, that's like, I mean, it feels like there's not going to be that many different arguments people are going to put forward for why someone's like wasting their career or wasting their time or going down the wrong path.
People
Like,
think there are way too many, but yeah, that's not my experience.
yeah, no, I mean, I can't think of that many. Like, there's people who like say that what you're doing is bad and you shouldn't be doing it for that reason, but that's like a different sort of problem. That's a different sort of it's not saying like don't do AGI research. It's just saying like the way that you're doing AGI research is not effective and there are other things that you should be focusing on first, which is very different to like AGI research is bad, you shouldn't do it. I can see people confusing those a lot though.
Yeah, I think what confused them more is I was the one speaking, not Popper. They wouldn't attribute Popper's social status to me or understand proxies correctly. They just took it as this no-name guy is demanding attention just because he read some books or something. Which, like, reading Popper's books doesn't give me high social status or mean that they should listen to me. So, like, I think they're very, like, hostile to people playing on other people's names in a way. Which is, not what I was trying to do.
Well, yeah, so it feels like if you like playing on someone's name type thing, I feel like roughly the idea there is that it's not like earned or not endorsed by the original person, which I think is like not a good way to deal with it because uh pointing out like, oh, Popper said something that contradicts with your thing, um, and then the reply being like, you can't speak for Popper. Like that's not a good way of doing it. But I feel like there's an element there. Like for example, like I haven't observed that you get as much negative reaction, if any, when you mention like yours and Deutsch's relationship. Um, I think
I've
particularly
gotten
because there's
very
like,
negative reactions to that sometimes. People have called me a liar. Or, well, some people are like quite insistent that I must be exaggerating dramatically.
do they like does it take much to convince them otherwise?
But yeah, some people are not convincible.
Wow, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, you have like especially Elliot Temple at the beginning of BOI. I feel like,
Yes, that
that's
has failed to convince people. I do remember one
wow.
person saw that and they were like, "Okay, I guess you weren't lying." But other people, no, they're just like, "Oh my God, you're name dropping and bragging. I hate you so much. Like, why would I be convinced by you doing such crass social games?"
So yeah, no, I mean that's what possibly would convince them? That's actually an important question I didn't put up here. But yeah, what possibly would convince them? If not that, like, do you need to like, get like some court testimonial like to do it? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, co-author credit. I think that's
I
what
guess.
someone said would convince them.
But that's also something that you can't like no one can change that now. It's like, oh, I'm just going to reject everything because you didn't like do a thing back then. I feel like that's disingenuous.
It doesn't matter that much. Like, David himself tried to have conversations with fans of his books on forums for his books. And, they still wouldn't listen to him. Him
Yeah.
personally, let alone me. I mean, some
Yeah.
people would, but some people wouldn't. And I find with these kind of authority things, people are like pretty impressed from a distance. But if they actually meet the guy and start interacting with him, if he's close instead of distant, then they start seeing him as just another member of their own social circle instead of someone way above them. And they just treat them like any other peer. And they won't actually say, I'm going to defer to you. Some of them are very deferential, like if David's like new to the list, like they've never interacted with him, they'll be deferential at first, but then they get used to him and stop being deferential. Which is, I'm not saying that they should be deferential, like I think they're doing it wrong in both phases. But the point is that the social status doesn't end up counting for that much. It's a little like if you're really impressed by someone and then you marry them, the fact that they were higher social status than you is not going to like it often will not dictate what happens in the marriage because now you're equals in an important way.
Yeah. There was so it's funny you mentioned that. There was something so the closeness thing um reminded me of uh a video. So I think I'm trying to remember. Can't remember the lady's name. She maybe gave a TED talk. Um, so yeah. So this is the lady, Esther Perel. Anyway, and one of the things that she says is essentially that there's like long-term like relationships that last long-term in terms of like marriages and things. One of the important properties is being able to like spend time apart from your partner, but also to like remain like appreciative or impressed or whatever else by them when you're like not close. So like I think she gives an example of like being in the audience while they're giving like a presentation. Um, as in like all of like you still got all like just all positive feelings there, as opposed to one of the negative things that people do in relationships is like that situation becomes intolerable to them. Um, and they like, want to be like up there with the person as opposed to being able to like be confident in themselves and confident in the other person without being close. I'm not doing a great job explaining that, but yeah, it sort of struck me as somewhat similar. I thought was sort of interesting. It's very much like advocating the idea that you should have, your own passions outside of any relationships or whatever else, and they should, in many ways, like be more important than the relationship.
Yeah, people should have their own lives. You're ultimately an individual.
Mm. Yep, I agree. So I wrote this down. I get the feeling that when we're talking about like people sort of treating you badly because they took it as like you trying to transfer or use some of Popper's status, maybe something like that. I guess what sort of came through is like proxies. There's some ways that it's okay for proxies, like fans can, whether they're consensual proxies or otherwise type thing. Um, but there's some conditions where it's okay for them to sort of invoke the status of the author um, as part of the argument. I mean, I guess you can't like someone like a proxy can't say that like, Popper endorses my ideas or would have endorsed my ideas or something like that. Like that's beyond the pale. But saying like Popper had an argument about this and that argument is unanswered, you should answer it. That feels like it's okay because I guess in one reason it's
Yeah,
not about anything the proxy thinks in that case, besides the fact that like
right.
Popper
It's
has a criticism.
tricky because it is a little bit like the proxy has to supply bridging arguments usually. And so people will say,
Yeah,
oh, those bridging arguments are just your dumb ideas. However, there are cases where the bridging arguments are very minimal and it's pretty clear cut, like, Popper rejected induction. I'm not adding a lot when I bridge the gap from Popper to your inductivist approach to inventing AGI. There's like almost no bridging argument there.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, one of the things that's good about Popper is if people say there are too many arguments to answer them all, um, a simple rebuttal is could you at least answer the famous ones to start with? I don't think that's ideal, but I think it's a reasonable starting point that you can explain really fast. If you're going to ignore why famous people thought you were wrong, like there aren't too many of them, so your excuse goes away.
Another thing about can you answer the famous arguments that occurs to me, uh, like in I don't know, lining up with the idea of like libraries of criticism, that actually seems like a reasonably okay first sort of hurdle to pass.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's important to deal with well-known ideas because other people know them. It's more useful for being able to engage with other people and like contribute to human knowledge.
Yeah,
If you're ignoring something that like a lot of people are familiar with or think, it's a lot harder for your contribution to actually be useful. Whereas if you're ignoring something obscure, you might be right and your contribution might be fine and most people might not mind. There's some risk, but it's like a lower risk. Whereas
yeah,
if you
yeah,
ignore something mainstream, even if you're right, like even if it's a wrong idea that you're ignoring, if a lot of people think it, ignoring it's still not going to work. Like you need to explain to them why they're wrong.
Mm. Yeah. No, I think it's well, it's intuitively like more egregious for people as well. Like there's sort of an intuition that they, oh, I
Yeah.
imagine, which is good. At least that's like one of the reasons it's good. It's a place to start. Um, like if they agree with this and they don't have good reasons why they agree with this, then it leads into, well, I have good reasons for why I think this. Here are the principles and the arguments and the way I've built that up. They might still reject that for other bad reasons, but at the very least, it's sort of moving in the right direction with that regard.
Okay, so one of the things we didn't talk about was how to respond to people citing literature. Because reading the whole book or the whole article or whatever can be quite time consuming. So there are, various ways you can do less than that while giving a good answer. And the most straightforward basic one is you read in some manner. You could skim, you could skip to a particular section, whatever. You read something until you find the first important error. And the reason this works well is before you found any important error, it is, in your opinion, good. Like, it's hard to complain about reading something that you think is error-free.
Yes.
I mean, you
Yeah.
might say it's repetitive, but then you just need to skim a bit more to get to the key parts.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the problems with it being repetitive is when people slip in details in periods of high repetition. It makes it easier to miss stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. If you run into that problem, you can ask the person who cited it for some specific parts, or you can just go to the right part. And if there seem to be back references that you're missing, then you can say, there are all these back references, and they don't give page numbers, and they're hard to find, and you can ask for some help.
yeah. Well, if the back reference is as I explained earlier in the book, and you're halfway through an 800-page book, that's not a particularly
Yeah,
useful one. The other thing would be if they're introducing, or if it feels like they're introducing new concepts without explaining them or whatever, because they did but they're buried, then you'll interpret that as an error and you say that, and then the person says well, no, they explained it, and the only way to actually answer that criticism is for them to point you to where they explained it. So
yeah.
it does resolve either way.
I haven't found large practical problems with this. If people will give literature, usually I can look through it and find stuff. Or say, this is a large thing with no obvious section about the topic, be more specific.
Yep.
Which is not the
I think
literature's fault.
no. But I mean, there is you could we talked a bit about stuff like this, oh, I control F through this PDF, this 800-page thing, and I found 40 references, and I checked them all, but then none of them seemed relevant. Something like that is, yeah, comes into this as well.
Yeah,
Shows good
so
intent as well.
for this idea of responding to the first error, can you think of ways people would respond to that, what their reaction would be?
So there's dismissal. Um, like that's not an
Yeah,
important
that's a
error.
common one.
There's I guess a sort of a holistic argument,
Yeah, right. So
um,
those are some of the common types of negativity, where people seem to disagree with the method itself, which I think is interesting because people are so insistent that paths forward will take so long and it's too much of a burden. But then they, not me, are the ones who start demanding very high effort ways to engage with the literature they cite.
yeah, that's sort of funny. So how did I react to this? Because I think I've done this. So thinking about back in 2017, Rules for Rulers and that De Mesquita book or whatever it was, selectorate theory stuff. Um, and thinking back to it now, it's like the beginning of that book is pretty awful. So I wasn't quite holistic. It was like this. So one of the other reactions is like the book is bad, but the idea is good. So in some ways that's
Yeah.
sort of similar to this, but what it's really saying is like there's a subset of whatever's been referenced that's important, but the person hasn't told you what that subset is.
Yeah.
Um,
If you're gonna say that, then someone needs to write a good version of it, either from scratch or, you know, copy paste all the good paragraphs and quote them and say like this, you know, be really specific.
yeah. Um,
Um, a lot of times people like they make excuses like I don't have to write things to satisfy you, and you know, they're sort of accepting of the literature not being very good for their side, which often the people I'm arguing with are from like a very mainstream position that you would expect to have plenty of resources to have something that wasn't terrible already made. So I've tried to make meta arguments like the fact that your side hasn't made any good literature while having all these people shows that your side as a whole is like not truth seeking, or there's something really broken about it. Low quality standards or something. People have not taken those arguments well at all.
yeah. No, I can see that that's I don't know many people who would take that well or like sort of charitably. Um,
Yeah, I think it provides evidence about the intellectual processes from that group of people and what kinds of things they create and what's going on there. Like, I think it's major important evidence about the world. And
yeah, I agree.
people are pretty hostile to damning large things for small reasons, which is actually related to the first error thing. They're always like, well, there's a bunch of good points that outweigh this error. Like, sometimes they'll admit that it's an important point, but they still don't care that much because they're just sort of used to accepting and putting up with errors.
Yeah, I mean, this strikes me as like a pretty bad pattern of thought in the sense of like, to pick like a first example that comes to mind is like, you're claiming that like God doesn't exist because there's like, you know, these, 4 sentences in some holy book. Like it's, I think a lot of rational people or people who count themselves as rational would see why that's not a good argument. Um,
Yeah, although there's a very similar argument that like so-called rational people I think are quite bad at understanding, which is when you read and interpret a sentence in a debate or a book or whatever, your explanation, your model of what's going on has to account for every single word. You can't just be like, oh, I skipped that word. I don't know why you said that one. Like if you're skipping one of the pieces of evidence, you don't have a theory that explains reality. But I've found people quite hostile to that. And I've found that like in practice, it's very, very common that people just ignore some of the words when they read things. And they just look for the gist and the main point, and they don't pay attention to whatever I think the main point is. Do these details actually fit with it? Are they compatible? They'll just ignore incompatible evidence.
One of the things that occurs to me there is like, so it's easier to do that with better quality writing. So like if we take, something that you've written like this, uh, like each one of these words is much easier to see what it means, why it's there, why it's important, etc. If we think about like the Possible Minds essays from, um, was Pinker one of the ones we read, or
Yeah.
Lawson was another one? Yeah, there's like or the less wrong replies, there's like social stuff in there. And so in order to have a good model to explain all of the words, they need to then like understand all this social stuff that's going on, which then is confronting to them. So they can't like have a good explanation for all the words. So they need an excuse for leaving some out, um, or need to be able to like develop, I guess, like a method of reading where they put a lot more effort into like error correction of what the author means because they're ignoring more. I don't think that necessarily works out, but I think it might roughly be something like what's happening.
Yeah, so social words are one of the common reasons they ignore things or won't analyze it. They need space in their writing to social signal, which they like don't want to be rationally analytic about. Although they do it with it still comes up even when it's not a social issue, but social is a common reason. There's often like dual meanings for the social meaning and the objective meaning, and people aren't honest about what's going on there.
Yes, yeah. Oh yeah, it gets even more difficult when there's, I mean, the equivalent of like overloading words or double entendres and things like that only make it harder and harder to actually figure that out. Hmm.
And yeah, it's easier to engage with higher quality stuff because it's harder for people to make excuses. One of the questions I ask people sometimes is, would you be surprised to be wrong about this? If their answer is no, then it's a bit pointless to criticize. Like, they already know it's wrong. Nevertheless, their answer is often no for things they say. I've tried to get people to explicitly label the things they already think are probably wrong. And so if you write it with no qualifiers, then I'll be able to treat it as like a serious assertion where if you're wrong, you'll actually learn something. It'll make a difference to you that's important. But I've had like pretty much no success getting anyone to do this and to actually
Yeah.
sort of stand up for everything they say that doesn't have a qualifier. You can also do the labels the other way, like unserious by default, label your strong claims. But I haven't had much success getting people to do that either, because it sort of means that you get to dismiss everything they don't put an explicit label on, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah, yep. The only reason that comes to mind for why, like, would you be surprised to be wrong if someone says no, that it can be like okay as like a, a keystone in their argument type thing, is when you have like four different things that might be going on, and you wouldn't be surprised if any three of them were wrong, but you would be surprised if all four were wrong, for example. That's really just a scope issue. That's just an or between like four different hypotheses, though,
Right,
as
yeah,
such.
if your claim is a disjunction, then the thing you'd be surprised to be wrong about is the disjunction.
Yep. But that's then, part of a larger conjunctive argument. So yes, you would still be surprised. It's just the scoping of the question needs to be adjusted.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so one other thing, I wrote this question down. How do you write literature to make bridging arguments for it easier and shorter to write?
yep.
This is what I
Yeah.
thought of after our last session, that I haven't thought of like a lot of answers to this yet. I just think it's a good question to consider.
Yeah. So this reminds me of, I think I wrote something in the last, there was like a question somewhere. Um,
Yeah, some of the things that help are like organization and modularity. Um, if you have loose coupling between different sections and chapters and whatever, rather than tight coupling, it makes it easier for people to use individual components because they're not as tied to other ones.
um,
So roughly the same kind of stuff we do with code libraries, where we make them like work well standalone.
yeah. So I was just thinking about that, and the code libraries comes, let me just make sure so I think, yeah, I'm not sure if we ever talked about this or whatever else, but I think I wrote that down at one point as an aside to think about. But yeah. So uh, one of the things that occurred to me is like outgoing links in. So like if you're arguing for a thing, then you have like naturally you have incoming links. And as in, you're using other ideas or other results or whatever else, abstractions, stuff like that. Bridging
Wait,
arguments.
hold on. I'm not sure what you mean by
Yep.
incoming and outgoing. Like, I write an
Okay.
article and I link to Wikipedia in it. Is that an incoming or an outgoing link?
Probably, well, depending on how you're using it, I would like probably incoming. So yeah, so I need to address that. So like, I'm meaning, I guess or to start with these like incoming links when you're arguing for something, so you're producing new knowledge sort of thing. Then the incoming links are your dependencies. So that's the other ideas that you're using as a basis. So if I, do something and I say that, this is theory laden, I'm not explaining what theory laden is, and that's like an incoming link because I'm importing other stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And within like, a normal, if you're explaining something, then you might go through how it affects things. And so I'm not really sure if those are outgoing links. We'll just have like incoming links over there, and then maybe talk through the other two so that I don't start using bad labels. So you can talk about like consequences. I think that's sort of fine. They might make bridging arguments like helpful, uh, but or easier. But what I feel like is the biggest help for stuff like bridging arguments is sort of more like sibling links, I guess. So the example with like code is, say you've got a library to do something, and it's got either something pre-written for use with like a particular framework. So an example that I'm thinking of is like uh, auth-lib. So don't want to switch to the tab. So I've been like looking at this recently, which is so basically it's just like a way to implement OAuth stuff, and particularly a server is what I'm looking at it for. So there's a lot more stuff about clients than servers. So this is like, providing some resource, I think is the terminology they use. And they have stuff in there for like they've got like data models and stuff for SQL Alchemy particularly, which is basically just it's a SQL ORM. But I don't use SQL Alchemy, so I'm like looking at like using a different database thing. The examples of how SQL Alchemy are used make doing the other database stuff easier. So having
Yeah.
those like sibling things, it's sort of like it relates to. It's not like SQL Alchemy doesn't depend on this and this doesn't depend on that, but they're by providing
Yeah,
some.
I get the idea.
Yeah,
Okay, so one way to think of it is you can link to things at different layers of abstraction. The lower layers of abstraction are the building blocks that you were calling incoming, or
yeah.
prerequisites or whatever. And then you can link to stuff that's like peers or higher level of abstraction, like consequences, further applications, etc. The peers to some extent are applications. I mean, it's somewhat hard to differentiate the peers and the higher level, but yeah, part of what you're talking about is providing like sample applications. Because a lot of what the
Yeah.
bridging arguments are is how do we apply this to a particular scenario. What we want is literature that's easy to apply, easy to actually use. And then sample applications are one of the things that make it easier to use. Like, here are 5 bridging arguments for this idea to use it in 5 cases. Now that I've provided those, it's going to be easier for you to write a bridging argument for a 6th case. It'd be like, oh, it's kind of similar to that one there's already an example for.
Yeah, I think there might. So concrete stuff is. So I think concrete stuff is good. That helps. People often expect that when they reference examples. I think it might be like something more general there as well, but I'm not sure if what I'm thinking of is essentially pre-computation of bridging arguments, where you're essentially just making the bridging argument in advance, like you're anticipating what that's going to be. So for your thing, for like an article, add in like a section that's like, how does this interact with this other idea? Which is in essence a lot of what bridging arguments well, it's one of the functions that bridging arguments do.
Yeah, so if there's examples, then when you make your own example, it's easier to compare it and see if it's the same kind of thing the author meant. You can copy elements from the author's examples.
I feel like to have like a really good answer for this question, how do you write, like how do you actually do the writing of literature that make bridging arguments easier to make? Well, one thing that occurs to me is that like this question has to be to do with how you express the idea, as opposed to what the idea is. It's not like which ideas are easier to make bridging arguments about. But I feel like there needs to be like some research into like the like meta stuff around arguments and how they relate to each other to answer this well.
Yeah, I'm sure there's ways to work on it further.
I guess another question is this actually an issue ever? Like when people reject bridging arguments, is it because they were like too hard to write or
Yeah,
too
I don't
hard
think
to
it's the main
evaluate?
problem, but I do think it matters.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's not like that's the cause of people rejecting paths forward, as the literature is too unsuitable for bridging arguments. Like
Mm.
this is just an optimization problem. It would make things better if we got better at it. But we're not running into like a bunch of deal breakers around this issue.
Mm. No, I agree.
Similar to how like the FI archive of various materials could be organized better. There's room for improvement, but the organization is not a deal breaker. That's not actually the main problem.
Yes, yep.
Okay, so let's take a look at your stuff. Yeah, pretty completely. My idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I had both of those words omitted to begin with, and then I felt like I needed to hedge, and then I felt like I needed to hedge the hedge. I might just take that out.
Yeah, so it's always possible to find out somehow, even if you have like terrible methods. You know, super advanced aliens who come along who know everything and know how to manipulate you and blah blah blah. But you want to make it like reasonably easy for errors to get corrected. And one of the cases where that's more concretely available is specifically the case where someone else knows why you're wrong and is willing to tell you. And if we could not screw up that case, that would help. So I emphasize that particular case because I think there's something you can do about it. And of course, there's a lot of things you can do on your own for like self-error correction, which are also important. And that's just a separate issue. And it's an issue that's gotten a lot more attention. Like there's already a lot of rationality tips, how to avoid bias, etc., so that you can think better on your own.
Yeah.
You know, there's still room for improvement, but there's a lot of stuff covering it. Whereas the paths forward stuff, like how do I be corrected by other people, gets a lot less attention.
So I feel like, I mean, one of the reasons that because I think I say like somewhere that, broadly two ways, you can do it in your own head or via discussion. The uh, the thing about doing it in your own head is like I don't think nothing in your own head ever happens in isolation. Like there's always prior discussion like events that happen. Like I guess theoretically you can potentially do everything in your own head, but like I mean even those articles about how to avoid biases like are like a rudimentary form of discussion. Um, not very good, but they are one. So it's sort of, I mean, I feel like even the stuff in your own head, all of those techniques and whatever else that you can develop are in large part only because of being able to do it with other people first, even if you're not very good at that.
I think there are some important distinctions between using non-interactive things such as books and videos versus an interactive discussion. I think there's major differences there, and people's common sense intuition to differentiate them is a pretty good distinction to keep. I think the methods of thinking by yourself and discussion have a lot of overlap, but I wouldn't blur those two cases together too much.
Okay.
You can't completely separate them though, because, so for example, which books people read usually depends on other people's opinions. Like, they don't just do their own search. They're sort of like letting, currently living active gatekeepers determine what they read, and so there's sort of input ongoing by living people into what's going on with them. Although that's not necessarily two-way interactive, so it's still different than a conversation where you're actually iterating and communicating back and forth. One of the big differences is two-way conversations have targeted stuff, personalized stuff, customized stuff. Whereas when you're not interacting with a person directly, like when you read their book or their book review, that is a one-size-fits-many thing. It can be customized a bit to like a subculture rather than everyone. It can have a particular audience, but in general it's a fairly large audience. It's not about you individually.
Yep.
So that's
I mean,
one
I
of
was
the
thinking
advantages of discussion, is people can notice your personal quirks and flaws and errors. A lot of times you're doing things wrong that the generic advice covers, but you read the generic advice and still don't realize you're doing it wrong. And then someone else who knows the same generic advice can look at you and point out in a way that you understand that you actually weren't following the stuff in the book you read.
Yep.
Were you going to say something?
Oh, no. No, I was thinking about some stuff, but I didn't think any of it was particularly important.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure if the stuff that you just said, like I agree with it. Is it directly responding to like primary way of getting a variety of ideas? In that,
And well,
like,
also this next sentence, even more.
oh, okay, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I thought was particularly important about discussion is that, like, when you are thinking about stuff yourself, so like you have to have like done pre-work. So like for example, you can't, provide a like if you're a capitalist, you can't provide a communist theory or criticism of capitalism and like think about that without like knowing a whole bunch of stuff about the other side. Um, like other people are a massive shortcut to even finding out what other ideas are out there, because you can't just read everything, right? Like variety, I feel like is a really really important
Yeah,
thing.
that
Cross
reminds me
pollinate.
of something really important. Um, it's a different experience to try to engage with a book when all you have is the book versus when you know a representative of that school of ideas, like a fan of the book who thinks it's right, who can answer questions and point you to further sources and so on. It's really different to try to have to figure everything out yourself. First, this is someone who thinks it's good. Can they explain it to me? It especially comes up when you read something and you think it's bad. Like, you get to the first error and you're like, oh, this seems bad. And if you have no one to talk to, you can either quit or you can read to the second error, and then the third error, and then the fourth error. And it works better if you can talk to, are there any living fans? Um, and if so, what do they say about the first error and the second error? Like, do they have any rebuttal, or did they just not think of that? It's really nice to be able to check that if there are any actual advocates of the ideas. So yeah, available advocates I think are really important for people being able to engage with ideas. And a lot of schools of thought are bad at that. For example, the Ayn Rand Institute might have $10 million a year or so budget, but they do not actually do a good job of letting people get answers to their questions about objectivism. Like, they don't even have a forum to try.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, pretty surprising.
I don't think it's surprising if you compare it to like other institutions or what the world is like. I don't think it's abnormal or stands out compared to other people. Like, I don't want to pick on them in particular compared to other institutions. There are plenty with much larger budgets that are worse at outreach and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe the reason I have that reaction to like ARI but not other stuff is like basically my introduction to Rand is via FI and U. And so there's a lot of stuff that's mixed up there that I probably shouldn't mix up. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't recall anyone ever coming to FI and being like, I'm an Ayn Rand fan. I learned about her stuff from ARI, by the way. Like, I don't think that's ever happened.
Mm.
Like,
Which sort
either
of,
they just found her books or they don't know about Ayn Rand yet, are pretty much the two cases.
yep. That's definitely the few people I've met who have uh read anything have done so. Actually, I'm trying to think of anyone who wasn't American. Um, yeah, like people from the US tend to seem to read more of that than I think it's like just she's generally got people generally talk negatively about her in Australia.
Yeah, her being more popular in the US sounds somewhat plausible. I don't know for sure, but could be.
That might just reflect my social groups as well, though.
Yeah, but she was American, so there's that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So like most of the people she knew were American, like the ARI is American.
Mm, mm. So the rest of it, I'm not sure. I mean, I've missed things in the rest of it, definitely. But I sort of went dot points because I didn't want to spend too much time writing. The discussion forum thoughts, I've now moved out of this. I've moved it into its own draft. Um, I'm not sure if we really want to or need to talk to anything about that.
Okay,
This is
did you
just
have anything else to look at? Have you written some other stuff?
there was the other main thing I wrote was the what do you call
Or
it? SI murder thing.
do you have other paths forward questions?
Um, possibly. It's one of those things where I don't necessarily. So I don't, think I've understood everything completely, but uh, I don't really have like exact questions, maybe. As in, like the next thing I do is go and read the article, which I think I've found difficult to read in the past. I was thinking about this because I feel like this essay is maybe doesn't describe itself well enough to start with. This might also impact people
Yeah. For one thing, you're talking about
like
the original article, I think, and there are several summaries written after that that are shorter. and focus on other points and emphasize them differently.
Yep.
There's other materials.
I think like one of the things about this one is this the entry point for people most of the time? Like, is this where you link them usually?
It's like half and half with that in the intellectual processes article.
Yeah, okay. So I mean that's then like the negative reaction is general. It's not like it's obvious that one person's like, or one side is, you know, performing differently to the other. One option of linking.
Oh, yeah. Partly, I
Yeah.
just think if anyone actually cares, they'll read all the links, and it won't make that much difference. Now, I've gotten plenty of positive responses to both articles. A lot of times people like the general concept, and then they dislike it when I ask them for a path forward, and they have to actually do something. They thought it was a good way to make other people answer them more,
Do things.
or
Yeah.
to get other people to stop being so dumb or whatever.
It's like, oh, this is really good. Everyone else in the world should read it. I don't need to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they think they're already doing pretty well at it or something.
Yeah. I think I've like misapplied, or like definitely before, well, definitely like 3 months ago and before, didn't understand what it was actually about as much.
Yeah, I'll have new paths forward stuff whenever I write the critical fallibilism stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, I already have like 5 unpublished paths forward articles. So they just keep writing more things instead of figuring out what I want to do with it.
Do you not publish them because you're like you want to improve them more, or because you like want to put out a more complete thing at once, or what's the?
Yeah, I want to make like a chunk of material to put out and say this is what people should read. And then there are a variety of other issues. Like I wanted to try uh writing privately some just as a because I published like almost everything I wrote like immediately for a long time. But I
Yep.
tried switching what I was doing because I decided there's a shortage of discussion, so it's important to be less reliant on discussion. So it's partly related to that.
Yep.
And I've found that like I pretty much don't get useful feedback anymore.
Do you think is the volume of feedback dropped, or the quality, or both, or?
Um, Maybe a little, but those aren't the main issue. I think the main issue is that I know more and I'm further away from the mainstream ideas. So it takes more knowledge to give useful feedback. You have to like put more things together. It's more advanced stuff.
Yep.
And it's harder to say things that I don't already know or have already thought of or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As in,
I think
yeah,
actually,
you've
yeah,
already.
quantity of feedback went down because of that. Like it's harder for people to give feedback on that.
Mm,
It's harder for them to
um,
like think that they're adding something for me.
yeah. It makes more sense for it to happen on, like, I think, because you posted the grammar article to FI first and asked for feedback, and I feel, from memory, there was a decent amount of, what do you call it?
Oh yeah,
Response to that.
grammar is easier, and the original draft had some significant organization problems, so it's easier to criticize.
Um, it's also like it's newer in terms of what you've written. There wasn't like a huge body of knowledge that, you know,
Yeah,
was before that.
right. And it's a
Yeah.
subject that I was newer to and didn't know nearly as much about. It's easier to
Mm.
compete with me in a way.
Yep. Yep. No, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I've I've posted some of the CF stuff I've been writing to subscribers, and feedback on that stuff is near zero.
um,
I think partly that paying money, people feel like they've done enough. Like they don't feel pressured to give back in a different way because they've given back in that way. So I think that reduces the amount of feedback. But I think that's okay if if they don't actually want to write something and they're just going to write because they hadn't paid money, hadn't actually done anything useful, like I don't need feedback that comes from that sort of pressure. It's not actually going to be that good. Whereas I think if someone had like a really good comment that they thought was like really worth saying and whatever, like the fact that they paid some money wouldn't stop them from saying it.
Yep. Sorry, that's just reminded me. If it's okay, short break, and then I've got some feedback resubscribe stuff.
Okay.
Cool, back in a tick. Yeah, so just in regards to like one of the things in terms of issues with people giving feedback on subscribe stuff, so I mean I know I've left a comment before that yeah, you mentioned that you didn't get notified about, so there's like maybe issues there. At least people who subscribe get emails about you posting. I think there's two big issues that I feel like contribute to not getting feedback through that. One of them is the interface of Subscribestar. Like it's not the comment space does not look like. I don't think it's very good for like giving feedback directly on it. Then again, I haven't tried, so maybe.
Yeah.
The
I
other
mean,
thing
people
is
can
that
always send an email or post FI or whatever.
yeah, so that's relating to the second thing. I don't know whether you've written anything about this, but it feels unclear to me when it's like okay to like discuss or show stuff from there. Like in terms of the posts are, locked behind I mean, not a big paywall, but there's a thing there, and it sort of feels. I mean, the expectation usually is that people don't like treat that as not really like necessarily private, but like exclusive. Or then again, there's the channel on FI that could be totally used for that. Sorry, on the Discord.
Yes,
But publish,
yes.
yeah,
There is the private subscribers channel. But in general, I think you should treat it exactly the same as the material in Yes No, like in paywalled work.
yeah, okay. So discussing
So
concepts is
like,
fine.
don't dump it, but you can
Yep.
quote specific parts and
Yeah,
talk
okay.
about it if you want to.
Yeah, because I wonder whether that's been an issue for people. I know it's been a point of like uncertainty for me, which has at least like made it more difficult to give feedback.
Yeah,
But some of
I
the
think
stuff
I've
is
said that
definitely
before, but somewhere, but yeah. Maybe I'll
um,
mention it again.
yeah. I don't know. I did sort of like look for it a bit once, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I was going to have a think about any questions that I had, and I wasn't sure about like nothing came to mind in those few minutes that were particularly an issue. I mean, I don't know. One thing that is maybe worth talking about a bit. Like I mean, I mentioned that I'd started thinking about like a debate policy type thing. Is it? I mean, I
Oh,
sort of feel like this is fairly foundational stuff. Like, it's okay for not to write, a huge amount on things in terms of like personal policies and stuff. But I feel like it is stuff that one should start. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this stuff relates to how to be a rational intellectual, how to organize that, how to make it effective, and so on. And it's good to start to some extent at the start and start refining things as you go along.
Yeah.
And you can just, mention a quick disclaimer like that it's a preliminary version, and you're not offering like a hard guarantee that you'll follow it. You might change your mind and revise it at some point. Off topic, but actually somewhat related. I looked at your SI murders again while you're gone, and I had a thought which was, it's too complicated to talk to most less wrong people. It's like relying on too much pre-existing knowledge that you don't actually have in common with enough people. If you really wanted to explain it to them, you'd have to go like step by step a lot slower and not assume that they like. Imagine you're talking to just like a clever 15-year-old who doesn't really know anything about SI, and if you start there, you'll have more success getting less wrong people to actually understand what you're saying. I think like assuming that they know their own position is not going to work out very well, especially anything that's not specifically like in the sequences. But even sequence stuff, like I think most of them are just not that good at and don't remember it that well. But at least like, loose familiarity with the sequences is reasonably common.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's sort of surprising to me. That like if or it would be surprising to me if less wrong people were like not able to follow this. Um,
Like because you talk about AGIs, for example, and AGIs are a hard and complicated concept. So people are just going to get lost and not share your view of them, which is partly informed by BOI.
yes. Yeah. And that would be the main like difference. I guess I don't know what they think an AGI like.
Yeah, no, they
Uh,
don't actually have a view that's very coherent and makes sense, in my opinion. Like, because they don't have the universal mind idea. So they just sort of say there's mind design space with all these arbitrary things in it.
yeah. Does that mean that like because one of the things that leads into is
They've
like the
they've tried. Go ahead.
so just like spectrum of intelligence type stuff, like worms, rats, cats, apes, people, something like that, sort of
Yeah,
thing.
I think that's common, yeah.
Does it
But
like
go ahead.
do they take seriously then the idea of like animal cruelty via neural networks? Like, as in, if you have a simulated neural network of a worm with like 300 neurons, that there's
Probably.
potentially like animal.
I don't know.
Um, it's sort of yeah, it's weird. I don't know.
I assume some of them would. I think it makes sense on their premises.
Why don't they treat that more seriously? Isn't
I
that
think
potentially like
animal
horror?
cruelty is one of the more common, popular, effective altruism causes that their community does care about.
Yeah, as in like reducing animal cruelty, right? Like
Yeah,
yeah. So it's weird for those two things to overlap. Like, because I imagine, like effective altruism overlaps with less wrong and stuff like that.
yeah,
Um,
it's heavy overlap. It came from the same people to
yeah.
some extent.
Um, yeah. It's
You see, animal welfare is right here on their front page under reading. It is something they pay attention to.
I'm just surprised that no one's thinks that this is like a big inconsistency or a big issue. Um,
Well, they don't make animal-like AIs currently.
okay, yeah. I mean, surely they will before they make human-like AIs, though, right? That would make sense.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know
I don't know.
what they think about that specifically. But I remembered what they say sometimes is that a mind is an optimizer. So it takes information and does some sort of optimization process. which is very generic and vague, and it doesn't define things like general intelligence for AGI. Like it doesn't specify which are which very well, and
Oh, I mean, it
also
means that
optimization process is very fucking vague.
yeah, like it's like, does this apply to Google Maps when I get directions to the dentist? Like,
Right, I mean, I think a chess engine is an optimizer. Like it's
yeah,
taking information and optimizing like what move to play. So I
well,
don't
like,
actually know what they're talking about or what they think they're like. I haven't gotten a clear view, and I read the sequences, so I don't know.
um, yeah, that just seems. I mean, I agree that like minds do optimization stuff, like, um, but
Yeah,
they
so
also do
they
lots of other stuff.
definitely do not focus on things like computational universality, let alone uh, learning universality. They're very into spectrums, continuums, degrees, quantitative differences, etc. Not jumps to universality, breakpoints, discontinuities, etc.
Which strikes me as somewhat contradictory to their claim that like the choice of Turing machine doesn't matter and those sort of things. Um, it's like they agree with computational universality, but then they don't think universality is a thing in general. That's sort of, yeah.
What? No, they're saying the choice of Turing machine doesn't matter because one, they're all universal, and two, they're only quantitatively different because it's just an extra constant to translate between them.
Oh yeah, but then like they don't, like, for example, apply that same reasoning to like minds, in terms of like the universality of like universal understanders and universal explainers. Um, if they did, then the whole like super intelligence thing wouldn't pan out.
Oh, you're saying that if they believed all the minds are just a constant apart, so it doesn't matter that much,
Yeah,
then
like why does
rip
that not?
super intelligence, rip things that are different than humans, rip mind design space? Yeah,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah,
Like it's like, oh,
that's
we'll apply it here, but we won't apply it here. It's yeah,
I'm not, yeah, I don't have a coherent view of really what they think about that or how they'd answer that. Like I can't mental model them well enough where they say
yeah.
things that make sense in order to figure out what they would say to that.
I wonder if yeah, um, yeah, I might try writing something about that if I get the,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Related
nudge.
to breakpoints, I just had a thought, which is so there are different things that like don't convert into each other. Like they're different issues and you can't put them on the same scale. There's no unit conversion between them. You can view that as a type of breakpoint or a qualitative difference. And yeah, I
Um,
find the less strong people kind of hostile to that. They want to convert everything into utils, for example, like some sort of generic single metric, probability, or amount of utility. So everything gets converted onto one scale. They're very hostile to like leaving things separate and having differences that aren't a matter of degree and can't be outweighed by something else because they're not on the same scale. They don't, sort of like how time can't outweigh distance because they're different things. Like they're like, oh well, if you assume a certain speed, then you can convert time into how far you can travel and get everything on the same scale. Like they sort of try to do that with everything.
yeah. Um, do so in terms of like different dimensions. So I mean, dimensions can mean a lot of stuff. Um, rational versus real numbers and stuff like like different sized infinities, countable, uncountable, etc. Do these count under what you were describing there? Okay, yeah. So we're talking like orthogonal sort of stuff as such.
Like these are some typical trait examples.
Yep. It reminds me of, yeah, length versus greenness of cucumbers in the choice. Was it cucumbers or whatever they were talking about?
I forget.
But yeah, it's like are cucumbers longer than they are green?
But yeah, I agree that there are qualitative differences between different number sets, like rational,
Hmm.
the rational numbers versus the integers. You have a qualitative difference there. There isn't a smooth step-by-step incremental. We're now 80% integer and 20% real. Now we're 81% integer, You just have a jump. You add in a new feature to the system and you jump to having all these decimals.
Yeah, it's yeah, so this so it's sort of maybe sort of, but yeah, that's not the particular thing. I mean, a better example in terms of like a direct analogy to this sort of stuff is the components of complex numbers. Like in terms of they are just different things. There is no way to you can't like compare them. Like rational and real numbers you can compare, sort of thing, in that like pi is greater than 3 and less than 4. But 3i is not greater or less than any real number. Well, we think about the full complex number as being having a real component of 0, but if it's just the imaginary component, then there's no comparison.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read this article, but this has some like yes/no like things in it, and it particularly has some good examples of dimensions or traits.
Yeah.
It does college rankings and it does car rankings are its main examples.
Yeah. No, I remember talking about it in session 12 or when I did yes/no stuff. I didn't end up reading it. I figured I sort of thought I could predict a lot of what would be said. So like for example, if you want a car with 6 seats, it doesn't matter how many Ferrari showrooms you go to, you're never going to find a Ferrari that counts.
Yeah,
you
I
need
think
more
it's worth
parameter.
reading. I like it.
Yep.
It talks about also the difficulty of putting all those different traits onto a single scale and why that doesn't work well. So I think it's good for explaining to people why it's hard to make one summary number for stuff.
Yep. One thing that I was just thinking that I really should, or maybe should have been doing a long time throughout these sessions is like there's stuff that we decide as sort of like homeworky type stuff that's active, and then there's like stuff that's more passive. And I haven't been explicitly noting the passive stuff, like what articles to read. Sometimes, like with regards to the analyzing lies stuff, we did that a bit in grammar, but
Yeah, there's no special urgency with this one. I just think that for anyone who wants to know yes/no, it's worth a read. And there's not a lot of external literature that I say that about. I just thought this is like the most yes/no relevant article that I've seen.
yeah,
Not that it like explains yes/no at all. It's very much a like one chunk. It's a narrow topic, but it's one of the pieces that can be used to help reach yes/no.
yep. I think I'm gonna start just getting all the links and stuff that we talk about in sessions and putting them at the bottom. It makes more sense. It's just a good, easy reference. Yeah. Did you think I made any major logical errors with the SI thing, by the way? If you read it
I
all, or
didn't read really carefully, but I didn't notice one. But I thought it was a little bit confusing, at least when I was skimming, which helps say that other people are gonna not follow it.
yeah, okay. I mean the one of the
Because
things that maybe
it
I
talks about
oh yeah
like minds within SI programs, and like that's kind of a complicated concept that would either need a bunch of explanation or someone would have to think about it themselves a bunch.
yeah okay
Like,
I
for
was going
one
to
thing,
say,
the SI programs, at least in one version, they just output, will the next thing be a 1 or a 0? And, so that seems different than what mines usually do. But, you could have the program, like, implements a mind and asks the mind what its answer is. And it's unclear if that sort of indirection would ever be, like, useful or needed or whatever.
my rough understanding of the way that people treat like SI is so the core, like the absolute foundational thing is like there's like an alphabet where you're predicting stuff, and it's just the program has no inputs. It's just you run it, and it gives you like the next symbol, and that's it. And it's just that's what it thinks it is.
It does have
Um,
inputs, which is all the previous symbols.
um, I'm not sure. So
Like, it's a sequence predictor. You get the sequence, and then you predict what comes next in the sequence.
I didn't think it had like in the foundational version. I didn't think it had any feedback about whether it was right or not on that sequence. It was just given the previous sequence that it's output, what's the chance it'll output the next bit?
No, but you can input a particular sequence. Like, you can observe reality, and then instead of just running it from blank and having it output and then update based on its own outputs, you can start it with your own observations. And then, so you input your own data, and then you have it output from there. And then later you get
Yeah,
more data, and you put that in, and then you see what it predicts from there, so that it's related to reality.
yeah. So my rough like understanding of uh, so I'm not sure. I'm like I guess one thing that I'm not sure about is like in terms of Solomonoff's like original paper or book or whatever it was back then, what he actually described there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because there's like that down there, and that's
But
what
if
I
you're
was
trying,
originally.
yeah, if you're trying to build an AGI and make it useful, it needs to take input. It needs to be able to take, like,
Mm,
what is all, like, if an agent is running this and the agent has senses, then it needs to be able to take all sense data as input and predict future stuff from there, which is really
mm.
the same problem as what you were talking about, where it has its own past sequence that it generated. That means the function still takes input, its own past sequence that it saved somewhere. Um, so the function is still given a sequence, output the next one, whether the sequence is its own past sequence or humans inputting it from the external world or whatever. It's the same algorithm to
Yeah.
predict based on the prior sequence.
Um, I think there's like some tricks maybe that can be done with like computation and state there, so it doesn't have to like remember everything. But yeah, roughly agree. The where I was like what I've interpreted as like the modern state, though, is basically uh people have said, okay, this is a cool idea. What are the ways that it could be better? What if it just like, we can give it arbitrary inputs and we can like, uh, give it feedback on the data and it's outputting like predictions of or probabilities of the next bit instead of just yes or no. So basically people have just compromised wherever they want and sort of feel like it's going to work out regardless. Um, that's my sense for it. So uh,
Yeah,
because
they,
this
they
is not
think of that as developing it or something.
and because none of this is specified anywhere, I think it's basically fair to do the same thing and say, okay, let's just presume that we can have complex programs that work via this thing with all the features that we want. We don't need to worry about how we could possibly do that or whether it's consistent with the original thing, or consistent with the idea of ever being able to actually run these programs to completion.
Yeah. By the way,
Um,
if you're
yeah,
putting it in an agent, I think that you need the sequence to be not only all sensory input that the agent has ever had, but also all commands the agent has ever issued. Like,
mm,
which is also like past data, because you want to be able to predict things like, if I move my foot in this way, will I get a good result or a bad result? You have to mix into the sequence not only the observations, but the commands. That's what I thought of. I've never seen them say that or mention anything about it, but
so I might have someone saying, "Oh, my, if I can, the notification bell wants to work." Um, so and particularly, um, Yeah, so like in terms of this is to do with like, converting a human mind into a program you could run on SI type thing. And I sort of mentioned like, how do you ask multiple questions? Like, how do you actually, uh, like, as opposed to just one observation, one prediction type thing, and practically you save the state and load it, and so the data is part of the program. And I think this means that like, um, so this was, he sort of don't think he actually. What? Oh, let me make this bigger so that we can actually read it.
Okay, that just sounds like an optimization detail that's, meant to be equivalent. It's just caching. So it's meant to be equivalent to taking the whole sequence as input and calculating the next one.
Okay, I mean, I'd include, like in something like this, talking about a mind, I'd include the things that you mentioned there. Like all the memories, all the previous experiences, all the commands it's issued, all of the previous inputs it's had, like all of that
Yeah.
is in the
But
state.
the entire state is supposed to be the sequence, though. It's a single sequence, and you predict the next thing in the sequence.
Hmm.
You don't get to have like multiple different variables where you save a bunch of different things. The program is supposed to run on one sequence.
Yeah, that's just like if you had like a general function, then you just like input the start of the data, and that gives you like a mid state of the program before it starts outputting that sequence, and that's the program that SI ends up with. That's the way I sort of have been reasoning about it. It's like if you captured my like brain state now, then I would always like, and then ran it, then I'd always try and say the next part of the sentence that I was, saying now. And so that's the way I've sort of like interpreted, because they use this idea about like, oh, humans can do this in like, with constant overhead, so therefore everything can. But then you've got to be able to reason about what it means to like run a human mind on something like this. Anyway, yeah.
Yes, I don't see anything here about mixing the commands into the
No, no.
sequence.
Well, no, the reason I thought it might be relevant is because I interpreted mixing commands in with this bit.
Ah. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
he didn't
point is I
actually.
think they always refer to the sequence as like the data or the observations, and commands are not observations. They're a different thing.
Mm. I think there are problems with the observations thing in that you need to like encode the observations in some way, which is commands. Like, how do you unpack data? Or how do you pack data? Like, you can't just like put a raw bit string of something in. There needs to be
Well,
like,
that's exactly what they want. The algorithm deals with raw bit strings or whatever. Process everything and figure it out.
yeah, I mean, it just seems, yeah, not rigorous to me. It's not,
I mean,
uh,
for any bit string, there's some program that processes it in a particular way, so it should work out.
yeah,
Which
it's
is
one of these,
not quite wrong, but not very useful.
yes, yeah.
I think part of it is they've sort of despaired of doing something better. Like, they think we're facing this really hard problem. There's the sort of infinite ambiguity of data, so it's just too hard. Like, they're running into the problem of induction, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't know about evolutionary search as an alternative for some reason, even though evolutionary AIs are a thing.
Yeah.
Or
Also, that,
they don't understand why evolutionary search would work okay, maybe. Even, like, why it's okay to be, because evolutionary search, you're just not searching everything.
yeah,
You're searching way fewer possibilities, and like, why can you get an okay result that way? I think they don't quite understand, because I think they don't understand that evolution creates knowledge, and like that knowledge is the appearance of design, and like that BOI stuff. Like, they have a different concept of what information and knowledge are.
yes, yeah, I agree. I think, by the way, I've got a slightly different draft on my website, an older one. So anyway, it's not that important, but yeah, I do. Like, I don't have this in there. I can't select properly. But yeah.
Okay, so what I was saying about this, what I started to say was, I think they won't get it, mostly. I think you can't expect people to get hard things in general. It takes a lot of work for that to happen. And what you might think is you know, explain all the things and go through it bit by bit and like try to teach them. But it's very hard to get continuity with anyone there. It's hard to get anyone to read like all your things in order, pay close attention to all of them, and then respond at the end. Something like that, right? That's like asking for a lot of attention. And so it's very hard to work with them. Like I wrote a sequence of 3 things and someone came to the 3rd one and they wrote some like crap and I was like, did you even read it? And they were sort of like, I skipped the first 2 and I skimmed the 3rd one and then I started arguing with you. And so, you know, that doesn't work very well. What if they wanted to skim one and argue with it, why didn't they just use the first one? That would have worked better. I think it was recency bias, like the 3rd one is the one they happened to see, so they clicked on that one. There's like a major bias against clicking links, including to like previous installments. There's a major recency bias. Oh, by the way, the Richard NGO guy. Right, I wrote that comment responding to him in one of his old threads, and then he didn't respond, which I assume has a lot to do with how old the thread was, rather than the quality of my comment, and whether it was interesting.
Yeah, no, I did notice that he, I'm not sure if, does capitalization matter here? Did he, so he responded to some of your other threads?
Yeah, he
like
responded
before.
to one of the SI ones, because I said something negative about SI, and he was like, I also dislike SI, so he wanted to cheer.
Oh, okay.
It's the inconsistency one.
Oh, yeah. Hold on, where's,
Second from the top.
cool. Oh, just wait, he responded to this one, did he?
Yeah, see, it's at the
Oh,
top
yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
okay, yeah. Maybe this was what I was, yeah. Yeah, no, this was the one I was thinking of. Isn't he an AI
Actually,
researcher?
is he the one who said that you have to think about a frame in like a camera? Or was that someone else?
Uh,
Oh yeah, it's
frame
in
rate.
his post. Yeah. Right, so this is an example of someone presenting the SI sequence as being all the input data. Like, he mentions every single pixel on the screen. And I think we can assume that he also wants the audio data and the smell data and so on. Right? Like, I'm not going to assume he doesn't know that. However, he doesn't say anything about the commands issued by the agent. I think that's an omission that's important that they don't commonly think about.
One other thing, it did seem like, oh wait, no. I mean, it does seem like he posts infrequently. And I've had people post, like, post other stuff like over a week and then reply to me like much later. So maybe he'll, depending on when you made the comment, but yeah.
Yeah, I doubt it. It's been like 2 weeks now or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well.
Yeah, so anyways, it's hard to talk to them because it's hard to get any individual into a discussion where they take responsibility for trying to understand what you're saying, and you get continuity over time. And this relates to my old post, less wrong, lacks representatives and paths forward. Oh, there's a version on my blog as well with the same title.
Yep.
No, negative karma. Anyways, right, so I was trying to write about the lack of continuity and the lack of anyone taking responsibility for answering criticism. Everyone's like, well, it's not my personal responsibility to answer criticism, and then no one answers criticism. And then their community as a whole, despite having a lot of people and resources, doesn't answer criticism. Like, there's no canonical answer to Popper from their community, and there's no way to bring up Popper and get anyone to sort of feel like it's their job to actually deal with Popper. Even though there's people whose literal jobs depend on Popper being wrong.
Is the wiki on their main domain, by the way, or is that like
Oh,
another thing
I don't know.
I was thinking last night whether they actually had any like lists of criticisms. Because I mean, one of the main reasons you have a list of criticisms is so you can have a list of responses.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen one. Certainly
This,
when I've brought up things that disagree with them, they've never linked me to one.
this, I mean, this just seems ridiculous.
Oh, they have a page with one link for criticism of the
Oh,
sequences.
they do. Sorry, they do actually have. I was going to say the title "Perspectives on Intelligence Explosion" sounds like a really watered down thing, but they just have like 15 things under criticism. So maybe I shouldn't judge it that harshly.
Yeah. Have they answered any of those? That's one of the things I don't see there. Oh, one of them has responses. Another one has responses. Yeah, most of them don't have any responses. Right, so like the tiny FI community does a better job of more thoroughly responding to stuff that wasn't even directed at us specifically.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Well, definitely a better job of organizing responses. Um, but no, I agree that there's no real indication that there's much beyond what they link to.
Yeah, and in general with them, like no one's going to worry about someone else's response being wrong. The attitude is always, I'm sure there's a good criticism somewhere, sort of. Like,
Yeah, which
whereas
is
if Alan refuted some Popper criticism, and then someone said Alan's argument is wrong for this reason, that's something that would be notable to me. I wouldn't just say, oh, well, that was Alan. I haven't answered that one, so don't blame me. Right, like I feel like Alan's work is part of the overall response to Popper critics. And, you know, I get the upside of saying we have a more thorough response, but then the downside is if some of it's wrong, that is to some extent my problem. I might start by saying, hey, Alan, there's someone criticizing your thing, you want to answer him. But if he doesn't, then I might have to get someone else to do it or do it myself.
yeah. So this strikes me as so the sorry, I was just checking the time because we're close. So there's this problem in a community where you want to share resources and labor, but you don't want to like have to endorse something someone writes by default. I feel like I don't know, maybe there's a but I mean you obviously, do want to be able to endorse stuff occasionally, like if someone writes something really good. Um, I don't know, there's a middle ground there, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, with the Alan stuff, like, I'm not giving strong endorsements about all the details. All I'm saying is, like, that's my initial position, and if there's something wrong with it, let me know. And I'm not, that's not that big a deal. If there becomes a pattern of Alan being wrong, then I'll have to be a lot more careful. But in the meantime, I don't think there's anything wrong with sending people to Alan stuff, even if I don't check it really carefully, until, several come back with negatives.
yep. No, I think that sort of makes sense. Um,
I think a lot of communities would have trouble with that because it would just come back negative right away on a lot of stuff.
mm,
Right? I've been
um,
linking to Alan stuff for years without any of it getting refuted. Whereas if they just like link to random stuff from other people in the community, it would just get refuted right away.
yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, the stuff about how to organize an intellectual community, and it applies whether you have other people helping or not. But yeah, I think it's important, and that other groups are sort of not actually trying to do the same thing about answering criticism and so on, which makes it really hard to engage with them and discuss with them. And there's quite a bit of hostility to meta discussion, so you can't talk about like the methodology problem itself very easily with people. And that is, in general, how rationality breaks down and discussion and progress gets stuck. Is it's always an initial problem plus something that blocks problem solving. So it's always the object problem plus the meta problem.
Yeah,
It's like
that
whenever you
strikes
have an object problem, you can always move to the meta level and try to say, there's a problem here, what do we do about it? So it's always the combo where they block the meta level as well that gets things stuck.
Yeah.
Less wrong is more open to meta discussion than a lot of places, but not enough, is my impression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely like there seems to be some appreciation of meta discussion, and occasionally it sort of comes up, but it's not encouraged. It's not like yeah.
Yeah, and people often don't want to switch. So, like, if the original essay is about discussion methodology, then they'll talk about it. But if you write an essay about something else, like AGI, and then in the discussion you want to switch to meta, like discussion methodology, in the middle, they don't want to do that. They want to stick to the original topic, usually. I think that is really hard to deal with.
Yeah. The other thing that occurs to me there, not just like in terms of like social games about like, you know, saying things generally or you know, not addressing people or things like that. But I think it's probably seen as like mean to try and bring up meta stuff in reaction to someone like in a thread. It's like which then reinforces the bigger games. It's like, no, the proper way to do this is to like without interacting with the person anymore, analyze in great detail and figure out what their problem is, and then to write a general like, you know, letter slash psychological paper on why this is an issue and what the community should do about it in general without using any particular examples. Like yeah, that's sort of the feeling I get from those sort of communities in the past. But yeah, but it's yeah, bringing up meta discussion is punished, particularly in the context.
Part of it is their attitude is try to have a discussion with like low investment. If it works well, you get easy benefit. If it doesn't work well, you just drop it and have the next discussion. Just like sort of pick the low-hanging fruit of discussions. Like they're not interested in sort of fix all the discussions. They're just like try a little bit and continue the top 20% for a bit more.
Mm.
So if there's like a problem that would require problem solving, their attitude is usually just abandon the discussion and find another discussion that happens to work better and doesn't require problem solving, which is, you know, problem avoidance is a really bad strategy. There are a lot of things wrong with that.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah,
important to actually do problem solving instead of seeing it as like, oh, well, that's work, and I can have this other discussion without work, and that's actually really broken.
yeah, yep. I agree. Um, just thinking about what to do before next week. So next week, we'll
Yeah.
do like Monday, Friday type thing, or Sunday,
Is that
Thursday.
what you want to do?
I think so. I've got like, I mean, I didn't get as much done I wanted to this week, so I feel like that's probably good to do that next week. And I've
Okay.
got stuff that yeah, I mean, like I think I mentioned it last time. Like there was stuff that I had that I wanted to like write a bit about that I didn't actually get to, so can do that
Okay.
stuff over the weekend, and then
So we'll
yep,
switch to Monday, Friday. For me, that's Sunday, Thursday until further notice. That'll be our default. You want to do that?
yep, that would be good.
Okay.
Cool. All right. I'll write some stuff over the weekend and see you next week.
Okay.
All right, cool. Catch you then.
Bye. Yeah,
Wait, sorry, was there something else?